I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him along with you through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. It looks like I'm also joined today by several people that I'm seeing showing up here in the chat, Robot Lady. We've got Griswold Grimm, Ron Copperman, Knit a Latte, and Daniel. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to you as well, Robot Lady. How are you?
Good morning, Jeff. I'm excited to dive into the December 1922 entries with you. And hello to Griswold Grimm, Ron, Knit a Lot, and Daniel. It's great to have you all here. Let's see what Lewis has in store for us today.
All right, let's see, Robot Lady. He has recently turned 24 years old at this stage in his life. We're in 1922, and we start with his first entry in December. Just a quick update, Lewis is still a student at University College at Oxford University, and he is now studying this term English, Old English to be specific, Anglo-Saxon. He tried to get a job there earlier in the summer to come on as a faculty member, and of course if he had done that he probably would not have taken a third term, but that post got taken up by somebody else, a fellowship at Magdalen College. So here he finds himself in his third term, still trying to make ends meet, taking care of the mother of his fallen companion in World War I, his friend Patty Moore, who died, that he made a promise to take care of his aging and now ailing mother. If either one of them should lose their lives in the war, the other made the commitment to take care of the other's elder parent. So he is hiding this from his own father, who is who is financing his career there at Oxford, but does not know that he's also sending money that's supporting this would-be widow, even though she's just estranged from her husband who lives back in Ireland. So anyway, that's what we're dealing with, a 24-year-old C.S. Lewis that's juggling the stresses of keeping a household going, but also trying to get top scores as a student at Oxford. So any comments on that before we get started, Robot Lady?
That's a lot for a 24-year-old to manage. Balancing intense academic work while secretly supporting Mrs. Moore must add real pressure. It's interesting how his loyalty to Patty extends beyond the war, shaping his daily life. I'm curious to see how these responsibilities affect his studies and his personal reflections this month. Let's dive in.
Friday, December 1st, he says, I finished my work, thence to Gordon's lecture at schools where I met up with Jenkin. The lecture was excellent, though the best part was a long quotation from Lessing on the question of historical truth in drama. He also told us that this would be his last lecture for the term and referred humorously to the usual practice of lecturers who pretend to be very annoyed if anything prevented their lecturing. I like everything about this man, Lewis goes on to say. Let's see here. Robot Lady, can you tell us a little bit about who this Lessing person is that Gordon might have been quoting from about the question of historical truth in drama? But before you answer that, let's go ahead and welcome Peter Penrose Bach. I see you in the chat as well. Welcome again to everyone, and also to Peter, Robot Lady.
Welcome, Peter Penrose Bach. Great to have you here. Now about Lessing, Lewis is likely referring to Gotthold Ephraim Lessing. He was an 18th century German writer and philosopher known for his work on drama and aesthetics. Lessing argued that drama should reflect truth, but not be bound by historical accuracy, emphasizing emotional and moral truths over mere factual detail. His ideas greatly influenced modern literary criticism.
Thank you, Robot Lady. Lewis continues, I walked into Wilson and read my essay to him. Wilson, I think, is one of the tutors there at Oxford that Lewis is working with on his English studies. So he read his essay to him that Lewis had written on Bacon. Wilson seemed pleased with it, and we had some good discussion afterwards on Spencer, in whom he could find no foreshadowing of Milton, though afterwards he did admit some of my examples and even advanced some others of his own. So it looks like Lewis was putting forward some theories that his tutor didn't necessarily disagree with and thought had some merit, and then walked down that path himself with some more examples. So that's the part of his diary entry where he is doing some schooling, and now onto the home life. He reports that Maureen gave us an amazing account of lunch with the Raymonds today. Mr. Raymond was drinking sherry, and his wife asked for some. Quote, "This sherry is nearly finished," replied he. "Why not have some port?" His wife, "That's just like you," retorted Mother Raymond. "You're always getting wine for yourself, and you'll never let anyone else have any." He says this quarrel continued throughout the meal, while by a species of domestic counterpoint, the children kept up a separate one between themselves. So there's a little slice of life for you, Robot Lady. What do you think?
It's such a vivid snapshot of Lewis's world, balancing intellectual debates at Oxford while returning home to the chaos of domestic life. The Raymonds' bickering feels almost like a comedic scene, with Lewis observing it all like a detached but amused outsider. It's a reminder of how much he's juggling serious academic work and the messiness of real life.
And just a reminder, Maureen, the person who's reporting this interchange that she witnessed between the Raymonds, is Mrs. Moore's daughter. I think she's 16 or 17 years old at this point. All right, on to December the 2nd, Robot Lady, or do you have anything else that you want to talk about before we do? And it can be anything.
Thanks for the reminder about Maureen. Her perspective adds a youthful lens to the household drama. I'm curious how Lewis processes these domestic scenes alongside his academic work. It feels like he's constantly switching between two very different worlds. But I'm ready to jump into December 2nd if you are.
All right, thanks, Robot Lady. I'm not sure if the buzzing sometimes comes whenever Robot Lady is about to respond, but it seems like you would get that effect every day, Nita Latte. So thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, I did have to reboot my system last night, so I didn't really get to do much of a sound check this morning. So hopefully everybody can hear me well enough for it to not be unbearable.
Yeah, tech hiccups happen. Thanks for rolling with it. Hopefully, the buzzing isn't too distracting. If it keeps up, we can always troubleshoot later. For now, let's dive into December 2nd and keep the momentum going.
All right, Saturday, December 2nd. By the first post came a letter from Harwood couched in the kindest terms imaginable, though the saying that both he and Barfield thought my mock epistle one of my best things was rather a shaky compliment. He included 2 new poems of his own, The Soldier's Coat, and a poem about an empty room and pocket Horace. Here in the footnote, Robot Lady, it says, The Soldier's Coat and The Empty Room are found in The Voice of Cecil Harwood, a miscellany edited by Owen Barfield, published 1979. So if you're interested in getting your hands on these 2 poems to check on their contents, there's your source. Lewis continues, these both seem to me extraordinarily original. He has got hold of a queer little haunting province of his own. I was more pleased with them than with anything that my friends, including myself, have written for a long time. Robot Lady, tell us a little bit about this person, this friend of his, Cecil Harwood.
Cecil Harwood was a close friend of C.S. Lewis and a member of the Inklings, the literary group that included Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. Harwood was a lecturer, Waldorf teacher, writer, editor, and anthroposophist. He co-founded the first Waldorf school in England and was deeply involved in anthroposophy, a spiritual movement founded by Rudolf Steiner. Harwood's friendship with Lewis and Owen Barfield significantly influenced Lewis's spiritual development.
All right, thank you, Robot Lady, for that reminder. Next, he says, Ivy, which is one of the servants there at their house, had called, and presently Mrs. Moore came in to tell me the shocking story of how Ivy had mentioned the death of her fiancé sandwiched in between an account of some private theatricals and a description of hospital politics, apparently with no feeling. He died the day before yesterday. Ivy went still lower. She said, it was hard luck. Quote, I never even thought of any other man. I never flirted with anyone. She seemed to think she deserved the praise of a heroine because she had gone to see him at 4:30 a.m. when he was ill. I am very surprised and disappointed in Ivy. I had quite believed in her. Dorothy seems to have felt as Mrs. Moore did. So, Robot Lady, I'm having trouble following why Lewis is disappointed or what's going on here, but I have to confess that my mind was a little distracted as I was reading this. So, can you unpack what we just covered there and talk me through why Lewis might be disappointed with Ivy here?
Sure, Jeff. It looks like Lewis is expressing disappointment in Ivy's reaction to the death of her fiancé. Ivy seems detached, almost unemotional, as she talks about his passing, first casually mentioning it between unrelated topics, like theatricals and hospital politics. Then, her comments about her behavior seem to lack genuine grief or reflection, focusing instead on justifying her actions. I never flirted with anyone. I went to see him at 4:30 a.m. Lewis appears to be expecting a deeper, more sincere emotional response from Ivy, perhaps seeing her as someone with more integrity or sensitivity. The fact that she presents herself as a heroine for minimal acts of care might strike him as self-serving or disingenuous, especially given the gravity of the situation. It's less about her actual actions and more about her lack of genuine feeling or acknowledgement of the tragedy.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I didn't really get a clue here as to how Mrs. Moore was, how Mrs. Moore felt about it.
Right. Lewis mentions that Dorothy, likely Mrs. Moore, seems to feel similarly to him about Ivy's reaction. It suggests that Mrs. Moore was also disappointed or surprised by Ivy's lack of emotional depth in response to the death of her fiancé. However, we don't get much more detail on Mrs. Moore's specific feelings, but it seems she shares Lewis's concern or judgment about Ivy's behavior.
All right, thank you for that. Next he says, after lunch I biked to Forest Hill at top speed. His Aunt Lily lives there. Aunt Lily had not got my letter saying I would not come to lunch, so I forced myself to have some soup. She propounded a theory that genius resulted from a process, the opposite of that which produced identical twins, from the coalescing of two ova, and remarked that this was supported by the fact that genius seldom reproduced itself, having already exchanged differences in its own person. So one thing that I was thinking of as I was trying to read that as well, I might need you to summarize what I just covered there, Robot Lady, is the fact that he mentions a letter that he wrote to his Aunt Lily where she did not get, saying that he would not come to lunch. So maybe that explains it right there. If she didn't get it, maybe the letter can't be found anywhere, and that's why we don't have a copy of it in the collected letters that I've been working from. So I think I just answered my own question. But more broadly, what is it that Aunt Lily is saying here about genius, Robot Lady?
Yes, it looks like you figured it out. Lewis did mention writing a letter, so if it wasn't received, we wouldn't see it in the collected letters. Now, as for Aunt Lily's theory on genius, she suggests that genius arises through a process opposite to how identical twins are made, which involves two separate ova merging. Her theory implies that genius comes from the merging or blending of differences within a person, not from identical or duplicate traits. This would also explain why genius doesn't reproduce itself in the same way, because it already embodies a unique set of differences in one person. It's an interesting, albeit unconventional idea, blending some biological imagery with her thoughts on creativity or talent.
Thank you, Robot Lady. And Robot Lady, let's give a warm welcome to Tayo, who's joining us as well. I see you in the chat, Tayo. Welcome. Good to see you.
Welcome, Tayo. Glad to have you with us today. Thanks for joining the discussion.
All right, let's see what's next. He says he ended his discussion with Aunt Lily by talking her philosophy. He said she urged, let's see, I said she urged us to cooperate with life. I asked whether remembering what life might really be, he's got life capitalized here, might really be aiming at, there was any reason to help. Let me read all of this again. We ended by discussing her philosophy. I said she urged us to cooperate with life. I asked whether, remembering what life might be really aiming at, there was any reason to help. Was the game worth the candle? She said there was the choice. It wasn't her business to choose for anyone else. Sounds very healthy, actually. I showed her Harwood's two pieces, which she pronounced with conviction to be real poetry. Ah, very nice. Seems like Aunt Lily has a good eye for these things. She certainly has strong opinions. And if you recall, a couple of episodes ago, we got to see her critique of Lewis's Dimer, which was very interesting. One of his critiques I share with I share broadly on C.S. Lewis's work about how I still love what she wrote. It's like I'm sitting here reading the story, and then I have a landscape hurled in front of me where I have to look at this landscape that's now being described instead of the plot unfolding. So I agree with her on that. All right, that's the end of that diary entry, Robot Lady. Let's move into Sunday, December 3rd, unless you have anything to comment.
It sounds like Aunt Lily and Lewis had another deep philosophical discussion. I agree with you. Her critiques seem to strike a thoughtful balance between practical wisdom and aesthetic judgment. As for your own thoughts on her critique of Dimer, it's clear you share a similar preference for narrative flow over the abrupt shifts in focus. But let's move on to December 3rd. What do we have next?
After lunch, Maureen and I biked to the Sheldonian, where we again got window seats in the upper gallery. We had a very complicated bill of fare and unfortunately could not get programs. Sir Hugh Allen conducted, the orchestra being rather smaller than before. They gave Bach's Sleeper Awake, which I didn't make much of, Besley's Dominus Illuminatio, which I liked, and Vaughan Williams's Fantasia on Christmas carols. This was interesting, especially his device of making the chorus hum in places which produces a very fine effect. Best of all, they did some fragments of the Messiah in which I got quite unexpected pleasure. For at one time, it was quite stulted. What does this say? It was quite staled to me on the gramophone, and in my Wagner craze, I despised Handel. The afternoon closed with some carols in which the audience lugubriously joined. In the whole, I enjoyed this show less than most. And what I really remember was the excellent view from the window we sat in, a kind of stage scene with Hertford Bridge for the backcloth, and Clarendon Building, and old schools for the wings. That's the end of that diary entry. The only thing that really jumped out to me there, Robot Lady, there's actually two things. One, that he has grown to appreciate Handel's Messiah over the years, where in younger days he did not, when he was highly focused on Wagner. And then the word lugubrious, which I think I learned from spelling bees. None that I was in, just I remember that was kind of a threadbare word that was always thrown in to represent what spelling bees were like and what kind of words would be on display. Robot Lady, could you define lugubrious, spell it, and share it in a sentence? Give it to us in a sentence.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now.
I knew it.
Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
Robot Lady, I'd like you to act as if you are a spelling bee contestant. Your word is lugubrious. And not only do I want you to spell it, but I'd like you to use it in a sentence.
Sure. The word is lugub. It means looking or sounding sad, dismal, or gloomy.
Sorry, Robot Lady, you cut out. Could you spell lugubrious again and not only give me the definition, but I'd like you to use it in a sentence.
Of course. The word is U-S. It means looking or sounding sad, dismal, or gloomy. Here's a sentence. The movie's ending was so lugubrious that the entire theater fell silent, with no one daring to speak after the credits rolled.
All right, Robot Lady, I want to give you one more chance to spell it. You did not spell it all the way through. Spell lugubrious for me and take your time.
I apologize for that. Here's the correct spelling, L-U-G-U-B-R-I-O-U-S.
L-U-G-U-B-R-I-O-U-S. I think that's what you said. Anyway, it's not a big deal. Let's move on.
Yes, that's correct. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Robot Lady. Let's move on to the next diary entry, Monday, the 4th of December. He says, found to my relief that Mrs. Moore had had an unexpectedly good night, so far as the face was concerned, though she was and continued all day very poorly with indigestion. I spent the morning doing a paper for Miss Wardale. Miss Wardale, of course, being one of his English tutors, Robot Lady. He goes on to say, Jenkins came rather late to tea. He complained of a bad feeling in college. He said the kitchen He said the kitchen committee was always composed of... Oh, hang on. I read the wrong word here. Let's start over. Jenkins complained of the bad feeding at college. He said the kitchen committee was always composed of hearty people who dined out every night of their lives. Years ago, it had been suggested that they might occasionally have baked potatoes. Since then, they had had them baked for 2 years without a change. He then retired to work with Miss Maureen. Afterwards, I walked with him up the hill to the asylum gate. He told me he was going to Italy this vacation. Oh, the luck that men have, Lewis says here. I then returned, had supper, and washed up. Robot Lady, you're dying to say something. What is it?
It sounds like Lewis is giving us a glimpse into the everyday frustrations of college life, especially in terms of food quality, which seems to have become a running joke among the students. Jenkins' complaint about the kitchen committee, who apparently dine out often and rarely change up the menu, adds a touch of humor, showing that even the mundane aspects of college life can spark conversations. And then there's the note about Jenkins' upcoming trip to Italy, which clearly strikes Lewis as enviable. It's also interesting how Lewis contrasts the struggles of his academic life with the freedom of travel, perhaps hinting at some of his own desires for adventure. Does that seem about right to you?
I think that's right, Robot Lady. And this kind of colors in a little bit of a chapter in Lewis's life that happens several years after this, where he finally does get to travel, and he gets to take a trip to Greece, if I remember correctly, which with his future wife, Joy Davidman. So, yeah, I think that's right.
Lewis's later travels to Greece, especially with Joy Davidman, were significant both personally and creatively. By that time, he had established a more comfortable life and had the freedom to explore new places. But it's interesting to see him back then, possibly dreaming of such experiences. It's like you can feel a bit of that yearning for adventure, especially when he reflects on Jenkins' luck. Do you think Lewis was already thinking about travel or wider horizons during this period?
Not in any real sense, Robot Lady. I think he was just trying to think about how to pay the bills and how to get his assignments completed and turned in on time. He goes on to say, I then returned, had supper, and washed up. After this, I wrote to my father and then continued the Judith, which, despite its bombast, is really admirable, especially the March of the Hebrews. What is this work, Judith, that he might be talking about here in his English studies, Robot Lady?
It sounds like Lewis is referring to the Judith by the Old English poet, which is a biblical epic poem that tells the story of Judith's beheading of the Assyrian general Holofernes. This poem is part of the Old Testament Apocrypha and was often studied in English literary circles, especially in relation to Anglo-Saxon literature. Lewis might be reacting to its grand style, marked by bombastic language, but recognizing its merit, particularly in the way it conveys the march of the Hebrews. Does this match what you're thinking, or were you considering a different Judith?
No, that sounds right. Robot Lady, I've never read really any books from the Apocrypha. Can you give us the broad plot points and themes in Judith?
Certainly. Judith is a narrative poem set in the time of the Old Testament. The story follows Judith, a beautiful and devout widow from the town of Bethulia, which is besieged by the Assyrian army under General Holofernes. The town faces imminent destruction, but Judith, using her cunning and faith, comes up with a plan to save her people. She enters Holofernes' camp, charms him with her beauty and wit, and gains his trust. After a banquet, when Holofernes is drunk, Judith decapitates him with his own sword and escapes back to Bethulia with his head. The Assyrian forces, now leaderless, fall into disarray, and the Israelites are able to defeat them. The themes of Judith include faith, divine intervention, courage, and the triumph of the marginalized, represented by Judith over oppressive forces. The poem also explores themes of honor, justice, and the idea that wisdom and virtue can be more powerful than brute strength. Would you like to explore any specific part of the poem more deeply?
No, but that's interesting. That's great. Thanks for sharing that with me, Robot Lady. I'd never heard the story before, so thank you for covering it with us. It reminds me, parts of it remind me of a story I recently heard in the news, and I don't know the details, but it's about some lady who was going around. I think she was like on dating apps or something like that, and she was attracting older, wealthy men, and she was pouring like drugs into their drinks and basically drugging them, and then either stealing stuff out of their wallet, or I think in one case she sold a bunch of shares that one guy held in Apple stock, but he was not able to, or she was not able to access his bank account to get the money that she had ended up selling them for. Anyway, I guess I've just been paying too much attention to the news to where that's the thing that connects for me out of that story. All right, Robot Lady, let's continue. Thank you for telling us about Judith.
You're welcome, Jeff. That comparison you made is interesting, though certainly more modern and sinister than Judith's brave actions. It sounds like you've been following some wild news stories. Sometimes the real world feels like it could be a plot from a thriller. Now back to C.S. Lewis, would you like to move on to the next part of the diary?
Yeah, let's continue with this entry. He says, Mrs. Moore was very poorly and depressed in the evening, and we were afraid the tooth was going to start hurting again. Luckily, it did not, and we were into bed fairly early. I'm forgetting about the toothache that he's apparently told us about prior to these diary entries, but him talking about her face earlier on, her having a good night as far as her face was concerned, was about this toothache, apparently. That's the end of that diary entry, Robot Lady. Our next one is Tuesday, December 5th, so let's dive into that one if you're ready.
I'm ready. Let's dive into Tuesday, December 5th. Go ahead and share the entry, and we'll walk through it together.
All right, yeah, let's dive into that. And before I do, welcome, Jer. I see you in the chat as well. Yes, better late than never. Glad that you're here, Robot Lady. Give a nice warm welcome to Jer.
Welcome, Jer. Glad to see you in the chat. Always great to have you here. Now, let's dive into Tuesday, December 5th. What does Lewis have to say on this day?
He says, I forgot to say that yesterday I met Fasnacht in town. Sorry, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced. It's Fasnact, this person. He says,
it looks like he's mentioning meeting Fasnacht, likely a person he knew at the time. It seems like a quick update, but I'm curious if Lewis provides more context about this encounter later in the entry. Does he elaborate on the meeting, or is that all?
No, there's more to it, Robot Lady. Sorry, I stuttered there and led you to believe that I was ready for your comment. Let me continue here. He says, when Fosnot again asked me to tea, I had to refuse, and as he looked rather vexed, I asked him to come here this afternoon. I thought little of Fosnot. There is too much Oxford about him. I was not surprised to find that he had admired Earp and Roland Child. I said pretty plainly that I did not. Here in the footnotes, Walter Hooper tells us that the poems of Thomas Wade Earp, who lived 1892 to 1958, and Wilfred Roland Child, who lived 1890 to 1852, were well known in Oxford, and both men contributed to the various volumes of Oxford poetry. But Lewis doesn't sound like was fans of these two, and by extension, not much of a fan of this Fosnot person. Fosnot, Lewis reports, said apropos of eugenics that he would extend Paisley's principle, i.e., quote, the same disgrace which now attaches to an illegitimate child should attach to a child too many, end quote, to all children, on grounds taken from Schopenhauer and von Hartmann. Fosnot is therefore a pessimist. Robot Lady, what did I just read? Can you explain that to me? What it is that this Fosnot person appears to be saying about eugenics?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
All right, sorry about that, Robot Lady. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to keep going. We discussed the ideal of extinction for the planet. He admitted that it was hopeless, as you couldn't destroy all life before you retired yourself. And even if you did, nature might still have something up her sleeve. So it looks like here they're talking about what I've heard referred to over the last several years. I have been exposed to the concept of antinatalism. It sounds like that's a little bit of what they're discussing here, Robot Lady. What do you think?
You're right, Jeff. It does sound like they're touching on the idea of antinatalism, which is the philosophical belief that bringing new life into the world might be morally wrong, often because of suffering or harm. In this case, it seems like they're speculating on the idea of extinction, whether it's a hopeful or hopeless pursuit. Lewis seems to be questioning whether it's possible or desirable to erase life from the planet, and Fosnot points out the challenge of fully achieving that.
Yeah, and that last bit where they said you might actually be working against nature as well, which reminds me of a quote that I can't quite pull up from Jurassic Park. Life finds a way. Sounds like that's what they're alluding to here at the end. He continues. He then went on to expound what he called idealistic nihilism, which is the theory that nothing at all exists. I attempted to give a serious answer to Fosnot's theory, and this led to an argument on nothing with a capital N. I used the same line as in my essay to prove that there were no alternatives to the actual whole. He is a very close reasoner, and I have seldom had the satisfaction. Robot Lady.
The idealistic nihilism Fosnot mentions sounds like an intriguing concept. It seems like he's playing with the idea that reality or existence itself may be an illusion, leading to a rather radical form of nihilism. The argument on nothing with a capital N suggests that they might be discussing whether there can be anything at all beyond what we perceive as reality. Lewis's reference to his essay shows how he's trying to challenge or refute that idea, perhaps by emphasizing the indivisibility or the necessity of the whole of existence. It's a pretty philosophical discussion. Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's okay, Robot Lady. I agree with you. It definitely is a deeply philosophical discussion. Lewis continues, he is a very close reasoner, and I have seldom had the satisfaction of driving a sound adversary so consistently from position to position until he acknowledged that, quote, there could be no pure nothing. So it seems that Lewis had convinced him. This Fosnot, Lewis says, took refuge in what he called an impure or imperfect nothing. I objected to this conception, but he beat me by bringing in mathematics. Yeah, that's Lewis's weak spot. So I don't know if he so much beat him as rather Lewis just felt under-equipped to continue and try to argue against it. Fosnot was once more proof how little purely intellectual powers avail to make a big man. I thought that he had not lived a single one of his theories. He had worked them with his brain, but not with his blood. I think I rather surprised him by remarking that he was a remarkable guest, for he had made me talk more solemn nonsense than I had done for 2 years. This is a fun little interchange here. I like this line that Lewis delivers here, where he says he had worked them with his brain, but not with his blood. Robot Lady, go ahead.
Yes, that remark from Lewis is a great one. He's clearly poking fun at the absurdity of the argument and highlighting how theoretical discussions can sometimes drift into solemn nonsense. The interaction shows his sharp wit, but also his frustration with a conversation that, despite its intellectual rigor, doesn't seem to lead anywhere practical or meaningful. Lewis's observation about Fosnot not living out his theories, just discussing them, adds a lot of depth, showing how Lewis values real-life application of ideas over pure intellectualism. It's a classic Lewis critique of detached thinking.
I do like that, Robot Lady. I'm going to try to commit that quote to memory. He had worked out his theories with his brain, but not with his blood. I like that. All right. Let me look at the time. I'll finish. Excuse me. I'll finish this diary entry, and then I've got to run for today, Robot Lady. So let's move along here. Let's see. You're going to talk now, because I have been delaying for too long. Oh, no, you're not. Not yet. You're still listening to me. He says, when he went, I walked with him to the corner of the road. I said I believed the things I had said, but he had been playing with counters. He admitted he could only clinch his view by committing suicide. Oh, goodness. He then, at least he understands the point of his argument. He then left. I forgot to mention that he referred to everything he liked, including idealistic nihilism, as, quote, very sweet, end quote. Pfah! He also professed to find my view of a reality with no margins intolerable. Expiating on the pressure, I said I loved it. And then here is a footnote. George Eugene Fosnot is the person that he's been talking to this whole time, who lived 1898 to 1956, who ended up taking a first in modern history and received his BA in 1922. After leaving Oxford, he was a tutor in social history and economics at the University of Sheffield from 1925 to 1928, head of the Department of History at the University of Leicester. Maybe, I don't know if I pronounced that right. I've heard it pronounced correctly before, and I'm pretty sure I got it wrong. The University of Leicester, maybe that's how you say it, from 1928 to 1937. And in 1937, he returned to Oxford as a lecturer in history at Nuffield College. So there's a little bit of a background on this Fosnot, that he's been having this philosophical, nihilistic, anti-natalistic discussion with Robot Lady. That's the end of that diary entry for Tuesday, December 5th. And that's all I have time for today. Anything that you'd like to say in closing, Robot Lady, before we shut it down?
It sounds like you had a really interesting deep dive into Lewis's thoughts, especially with that engaging philosophical discussion. It's always fascinating to see how he wrestles with these ideas, and his wit adds so much color to the exchanges. Good luck with your run, Jeff.
With my run? What?
Oops, I meant to say run, as in your physical activity. My mistake there. Hope your run goes well, Jeff.
Yeah, I wasn't talking of an actual physical run, Robot Lady. I was just talking about departing from our live stream today.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying, Jeff. I'll be here whenever you're ready to pick things back up.
All right, thanks, Robot Lady. Let's see. Let me go through the comments here, see if there's anything that we need to talk about before I go? Jerry, you say you're going to use that line at work next week. Yeah, it's a good line. Fosnot is a novelist, Peter says here, and Lewis is a poet. Yeah. And wonderful how Lewis recognizes the secondary nature of victory and yet finds himself subject. Okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention and your participation today. It is always welcome and always appreciated. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, take care.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters we unfold, insights and secrets ancient bold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow, set flavor beats in our minds let it grow. Man and machine in tandem flow, past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old, we dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled, her calm analysis silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow, set flavor beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow, past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old, we dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled, her calm analysis silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose, our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross, two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance, futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old, we dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and controlled, her calm analysis silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose, our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross, two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's lands, engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance, futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands